Hello and welcome to another video here in this channel. Today I'll show you how to play Splendor Duel, another game in the Splendor series, also published by Space Cowboys, also done by Marc, this time together with Bruno Cathala. Starts at age 10 again, lasts about 30 minutes, and as the name says, it's a two-player game. To win Splendor Duel, you'll have to fulfill one of three requirements. Either you have 20 victory points from different cards and nobles, or you have 10 crowns from different cards, or you get 10 victory points in one color. The setup of Splendor Duel is very similar to Splendor. You have 3 decks with 1 dot, 2 dots, and 3 dots. You shuffle the decks, you put out 5 cards of the first deck, you put out 4 cards of the second deck, you put out 3 cards of the third deck. Then you put out 4 nobles, you put out your target card where you can see again what you need to achieve to win this game. Then you have a board for the chips, you have 3 privileges that you put next to it, and the only difference here to Splendor is that the chips are not in stacks, but the chips will be placed on this board where we have to start placing them in the middle and then move to the outside. Originally, the chips are in this bag, so we pull them randomly. Then you decide who the starting player is going to be, and the person who's not starting will get a privilege. And we're ready to go. Splendor Duel is played in a similar way to the base game of Splendor. I will not explain here how the base mechanism works of this game. For this, I will place a link down in the description of the video where you can actually see the gameplay in another video that I took before to the base game. As in Splendor, when the active player gets their turn, they have to do one of the following actions. Either they take chips, or they reserve a card, or they buy a card. Before you play your mandatory move, there are 2 options that a player can do but doesn't have to do. One is that a player who has a privilege can turn in that privilege to take any chip on the board, with the exception of the gold chips. So I could take, here if I turn in my privilege, I could take a pearl. The second option I have, before I actually do my mandatory turn, is that I can refill the board of chips. In this case it's not necessary because it's full, but as people start taking chips, the chips start going away from the board and the board starts getting emptier and emptier. And different from the base game of Splendor, when you buy a card, you don't return your chips to the stack, but you actually put your chips back in the bag. So at some point there are no chips in the game anymore, and one player will have to do the sacrifice and actually fill up the board again. When you decide to do this, you'll take the bag of chips, shuffle it, and you start placing the chips again from the inside to the out, following the arrow in the middle. The opponent who has not chosen to refill the board will get a privilege. They can use this privilege later to get a chip from the board. When handing out privileges during the game, they will always be taken from the middle, unless there are none in the middle anymore, in which case you can take a privilege from your opponent. If you decide in your mandatory move to take chips, that's also different from the base game. What you do here is that you can always take 3, 2, or 1 chip, but they always have to be adjacent to each other, and they have to be either in a horizontal, in a vertical, or in a diagonal. There can never be a hole between 2 chips. Should a player decide to take 2 pearls at the same time, as you can see over here, you'll have to hand a privilege over to your opponent. Should a player decide to take 3 of the same kind, they will also have to hand over privilege as written here. As in the base game of Splendor, you're not allowed to have more than 10 chips at the end of your turn. Should you have more than 10 chips, you'll have to return the extras to the bag. And as with the privilege before, you cannot take golden chips as you take chips from the board. Reserving a card is the same as in the base game. You take any card you would like, you take a gold chip, whichever you like, and place it on top of it. This gold chip you can later use to buy another card. It counts as any kind of chip that is in the game. As usual, you refill the place where this reserve card was. You're only allowed to have, at the most, 3 reserve cards at the same time. Also, buying a card is the same as in the base game. Here, you just have to pay the cost of the card, which are always written down on the bottom left of a card. In this case, you would have to return 2 green chips and 2 red chips. If you can do this, you can take the card, put it in front of you openly, because for the rest of the game, you'll now have this black chip available forever without having to return it. So this gives you a discount for all the cards you're going to buy in the future. Please note that the cards are slightly different than in the base game, and you will see that some of them actually have here purple circles, which mean that you also get an action right away as you buy this card, and I will explain the different actions in the next section of this video. You will also see that some of the cards actually have 2 icons on the card, which means that if you buy a card like this one, you will get a discount of 2 red tokens in the future. In this example, that would mean if I had this card and I wanted to buy this card, which costs 2 green and 2 red chips, that it would only cost me 2 green chips because I already have 2 red chips in this card. And remember, these cards don't have to be returned. To get the nobles, you're going to need to have cards with these crowns on top. And once you have 3 crowns in your hand, you see here the 3 crown symbol, you can choose among these nobles and pick one of them. They have different victory points, but they also have different actions that you can do as soon as you get the noble. You will also be able to get another noble when you reach 6 crowns. Taking a noble is not considered to be an action and can therefore be done in the same turn. The game ends right away once a player has reached 20 victory points or 10 crowns or 10 victory points in one color. As mentioned before, Splendor Duel has some cards that are different from the base game. For one, you have these cards that have 2 icons on them, which means that later on, when you have bought this card, you'll get a discount for 2 black coins and not just 1, as you would usually get. Secondly, some of them have crowns up on top here, which you need to get the nobles or to win the game. And then you have the cards that have a lot of victory points, like this one with 5 victory points. This one doesn't even have a coin on the side or no crown. You also see here that in Splendor Duel, a new chip was introduced, which is the pearl, which you might need also to buy off your card. And then there are 5 different symbols that can appear on different cards, which help you to get an action immediately after you buy that card. One is the circle with the 2 arrows, which allows you to do another turn right as you bought this card. Then there is this card that has a privilege on here, which means if you buy this card, you automatically get another privilege. Should there be no privileges in the middle, you can take it from your opponent. This one here with the crystal in the middle means that as soon as you buy this card, you can also take a chip of this color, in this case a white chip, from your board if there's one available. Then we have this one with the hand on it, which means that as soon as you buy this card, you can steal a chip from your opponent. With the exception of yellow chips, the gold yellow chips are not allowed to be stolen. This card here is a joker card, which you see it doesn't really have a color up here. It cannot be purchased as your first card, But if you already have a card, or if you have several decks, if you put that card on top of that one deck, it will now have the same color as your deck. So if I put it here on top of my green one, now I have 2 green discounts rather than just 1. And here's some hints for the first game. Splendor Duel plays very similar to Splendor. So if you have strategies for Splendor, you're not wrong in using them here. This game is a little more confrontational, because here I get to claim chips on the board where I'm pretty sure that the opponent wanted those too. Especially the pearl chips are always something that both players really want. I also don't want to leave my opponent any of the privileges, so I'll wait until the other person actually has to refill the board. I don't want to do it myself. I'd rather have a privilege so I can take whatever coin I want later. And then here you really have to also watch the nobles, because in some cases it's actually easier to get the nobles than getting the high cards in the game. And the nobles also give you extra victory points. So there's several ways to play this game and win this game. Make sure that you don't lose track of what your opponent does, so that you don't get surprised when all of a sudden they claim victory on something that you didn't even consider. That's Splendor Duel. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please subscribe below, and I hope to see you back on this channel soon.